The rain was heavy that morning. My shoes were old and wet. I walked fast, but people looked at me strangely. A group of women stood near the bus. Stop, they were dry under their umbrellas. Their clothes were clean and bright. One of them laughed and whispered something. The others looked at me and smiled. I felt small. My trousers were faded. My shirt had a stain. My hair was messy from the rain. I wanted to disappear. When the bus came, I stepped inside. I sat at the back. Nobody wanted to sit next to me. I looked down at my hands and tried not to cry. I thought, why do I always look like this? Why can't I be like them? The bus moved, but my mind stayed heavy. At the office, things were no better. I worked hard every day, but no one really noticed me. My boss spoke kindly to other women, but to me, he only gave short orders. Do this, finish that. I never heard words like thank you or good job. My colleagues talked and laughed. Together, they wore neat clothes, light perfume, and walked with confidence. I sat at my desk and felt invisible. One afternoon, the office had a small meeting. Everyone gathered in the main room. I stood at the side with my notebook. My boss asked for new ideas. Many people raised their hands. I had an idea too, but my heart was weak. I thought nobody will listen to me. I stayed quiet. After the meeting, my boss praised another worker. Everyone clapped. I walked back to my desk with tears in my eyes. That evening when I reached home, I looked in the mirror. I saw a tired woman. My hair was dull. My clothes were shapeless. I whispered, Ellie, what happened to you? My chest hurt. I remembered my younger days. I used to dream of being strong and respected. But now I was just a shadow in my life. The next morning, something small happened. I wore a pink shirt that my cousin had given me. I had never worn it before because I thought it was too bright for me. But that day I tried it. At work, one colleague, Rena, looked at me and said, Ellie, this color is nice on you. Her words were simple, but they touched my heart. I smiled the whole day. That one small moment stayed with me. I thought maybe clothes can change something. Maybe they can help me feel alive again. That weekend, I opened my cupboard. Most clothes were old, but I picked out the better ones and washed them carefully. I ironed each shirt. I polished my shoes. I tied my hair neatly. On Monday, I walked into the office a little taller. I was nervous, but something strange happened. A man from another team said, Good morning, Ellie. He had never spoken to me before. My boss looked at me and paused for a second. He said, Please join the team. At the table, he had never asked me to sit near him before. My hands shook, but my heart felt light. From that day, I decided to change step by step. I did not have much money, but I saved a little each week. I bought one new dress. It was navy blue. I also bought simple black shoes. They were not expensive, but they looked smart. When I wore them, I felt strong. In the evenings, I started reading small articles on how to stand, how to smile, and how to greet people. At first, it felt strange, but little by little, it became natural. I practiced at home in front of the mirror. I said, "Good morning," again and again until it sounded warm. Soon people noticed. A colleague asked me, "Ellie, where did you buy this dress?" Another said, "You look different these days." Even my boss said, "Nice work," after I finished a report. I had been doing the same work for years, but now he respected me more. Still, it was not easy. Some people whispered behind my back. They said I was trying to show off. Their words hurt me. At night I cried into my pillow. But I told myself, no, this is not wrong. I am only trying to respect myself. One evening, my mother looked at me and said, "Ellie, you shine these days. What changed?" I smiled and said softly, "I just started taking care of myself." She held my hand and whispered, "I am proud of you." Those words gave me more power than any new dress could. I began to keep a small notebook. Every night, I wrote one good thing about the day. Someone said I looked confident. I joined a group at lunch. I smiled, and someone smiled back. These little notes gave me hope. The biggest change came one Friday. The office had a presentation. Usually I stayed silent at the back, but that day I wore my new navy dress and black shoes. I stood tall when my boss asked for ideas. My heart beat fast, but I raised my hand. My voice shook, but I spoke. For the first time, people listened. Some even clapped. My boss said, "Good idea, Ellie." I went home that night with tears in my eyes. Not sad tears. Happy tears. I felt like I was finally alive. That weekend, I went shopping again. I bought a white blouse and a beige skirt. They were simple but elegant. I also bought a small bottle of perfume. I told myself, this is not just about clothes. This is about who you are becoming. By the end of that year, my life was already changing. People saw me differently. They asked me to join projects. They invited me to lunch. I was no longer invisible. I was still Ellie, but now I was Ellie. With confidence. But that was only the start. Bigger doors were waiting to open. My journey was far from over. Before I continue my story, please subscribe, share, and tell me where you are listening from. Your support means a lot to me. Now, let's continue. The next Monday, I walked into the office with my new white blouse and beige skirt. My shoes were polished and my hair was tied neatly. For the first time, I felt proud of how I looked. I walked slowly, not hiding anymore. My heart was nervous, but my steps were strong. At my desk, I opened my computer. Soon, Rihanna came over. She looked at me and said, "Ellie, you look very smart today." Her smile was kind, and I felt warm inside. Two other colleagues turned their heads and agreed. I laughed softly and said, "Thank you." That one moment filled my whole day with joy. Later in the morning, our team had a meeting. I usually stayed quiet, but this time was different. I sat at the table, not at the back. My boss looked around and asked for ideas about a new client. My hands were shaking, but I raised them. My voice was not very strong, but I shared my thought. For a second, there was silence. Then my boss said, "That is a good point, Ellie." Everyone turned to me. Some nodded. My heart beat fast, but this time it was not fear. It was pride. From that day, things started to move. My boss asked me to join a small project team. I was nervous, but I said yes. The team had 4 people. At first, I thought they would not listen to me, but I was wrong. One man said, "Ellie, can you share your notes? They are always clear." Another woman said, "Ellie, you explain things in a simple way. That helps us." I had never heard such words before. In the evenings, I continued to learn. I read small articles on polite behavior. I learned to smile when I entered a room. I learned to say please and thank you in a warm way. I learned how to listen without interrupting. These things look small, but they made a big change. People started to trust me. One Friday evening, our office had a small dinner party. In the past, I always stayed at the side, but this time I wore my navy dress and soft perfume. I joined a group. At the table, they laughed and told stories. When I shared one of my own, people laughed kindly. I felt like I belonged. After that night, things grew better. In the office, people often came to me with questions. They asked for advice on reports. They asked me to check their words. My boss noticed this and said one day, "Ellie, you have good communication skills. You make people feel comfortable." My eyes filled with tears, but I quickly smiled and said, "Thank you, sir." At home, I also changed. I no longer hid in my room. I walked in the park in the evenings. I held my head high. Sometimes strangers smiled at me and I smiled back. One little girl once said to her mother, "Look, that lady looks so pretty." I heard her words and my heart felt light. Of course, not every day was easy. Some people at work still whispered behind me. One woman said, "Ellie is trying too hard." Another said, "She wants to show off." Their words hurt me, but I learned to stay calm. I reminded myself, I am not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. Soon my boss gave me a bigger role. He asked me to lead a short presentation for a client. My hands shook when I heard it. I had never spoken in front of strangers. At night, I could not sleep. I thought, what if I fail? What if they laugh at me? But then I remembered all the small steps I had taken. I remembered the pink shirt, the navy dress, the notebook full of kind words. I whispered to myself, "Ellie, you can do this." On the day of the presentation, I wore my new beige skirt and white blouse. I added a simple necklace. I stood in front of the client. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I explained the point slowly. I used simple words. When I finished, the client smiled and said, "Good job." My boss also smiled. That moment felt like a dream. After the meeting, my colleagues clapped for me. Rihanna said, "Ellie, you were amazing." Another worker said, "I want to present like you one day." I could not believe my ears. For so long, I was invisible. Now people were looking at me. From then on, my boss gave me more chances. He trusted me with new tasks. Step by step, I started moving higher. I did not become a manager in one day, but I knew I was on the path. At home, I told my mother about the presentation. She listened with tears in her eyes. She said, "Ellie, I always knew you had this inside you. I'm so proud." Her words gave me more strength than anything else. The changes were not only outside. Inside, I also grew. I started to believe in myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was strong, not weak. I no longer whispered, "Ellie, what happened to you?" Instead, I said, "Ellie, look how far you have come." One evening, I sat with my notebook. I turned the pages and read my small notes. Someone said, "I look confident." My boss praised my idea. I spoke in front of a client. I closed the book and smiled. I thought, this is not the end. This is just the start. But life always has surprises. As I grew in confidence, some people grew jealous. They tried to test me. They tried to pull me down. I did not know then that a big challenge was waiting for me, a challenge that would test everything I had learned. The next months were not easy. As I became more confident, some people became unfriendly. They whispered when I entered the room. Sometimes they laughed behind my back. At first, my heart broke. I wanted to cry at my desk. I thought, why do they hate me now? I am only trying to be better. But then I remembered the little girl, the park, who said I looked pretty. I remembered my mother's words, "Ellie, I am proud of you." I decided not to let gossip stop me. One day I went to the break room to get coffee. Two colleagues stood near the machine. When I walked in, they went silent. Then one of them said loudly, "Not all people can be leaders, some only pretend." They looked at me with cold eyes. I felt my face turned red. For a moment, I wanted to run away. But I stood tall, poured my coffee, and said gently, "Have a good day." Then I walked out. My heart was shaking, but I was proud of myself. I had not let anger win. Soon a big project arrived in the office. It was the most important project of the year. My boss called a meeting and said, "We need a strong team. We need clear communication. We cannot fail this time." Everyone was nervous. Then my boss looked at me. "Ellie," he said, "I want you to help lead this project." My mouth went dry. My hands trembled. I had never led such an important task. But I looked into his eyes and said, "Yes, sir, I will do my best." That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Doubt filled my head. I thought, what if I make a mistake? What if people laugh at me? What if I lose everything I worked for? I turned again and again, but the fear did not leave. Finally, I got up and went to the mirror. I looked at myself and whispered, "Ellie, you are not invisible anymore. You are strong. You can do this." I took out my notebook and read my old notes. Each small step reminded me of my journey. By morning, I felt ready. When the project began, I dressed carefully. I chose a clean blazer and soft cream blouse. I tied my hair back neatly. I stood in front of the team and smiled. "Let's work together," I said in a clear voice. Some looked surprised. They were not used to hearing me speak with confidence. Slowly, they started to listen. I divided the work into small parts. I checked each person's progress. I praised them when they did well. I gave kind advice when they needed help. Still, not everyone was happy. One colleague, a man named Oren, always tried to question me in meetings. He said, "Are you sure about this, Ellie? Maybe it is wrong." His words were sharp, and sometimes others looked at me with doubt. My heart wanted to break. But I smiled and said calmly, "Thank you, Aaron, let's check again." I opened the file and showed my work. When the numbers were correct, Aaron stayed quiet. I learned to use patience instead of anger. Weeks passed. The project was moving forward. My boss often came to check. One day after a long meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "Ellie, you're doing very well. Keep it up." His words gave me energy like sunshine. But then came the hardest day. The final presentation for the project was scheduled. Many important clients and managers would attend. My boss said, "Ellie, you will present most of it. You know the details best." My knees felt weak. My throat went dry. Present in front of so many people. I almost said no. But then I remembered my promise to myself. I nodded and said, "I will prepare." That evening I practiced at home. I stood in front of the mirror, holding my notebook like it was a microphone. I said each sentence slowly. "Good morning. Today I will explain our project." I practiced again and again until my voice grew stronger. My mother watched me from the sofa. She smiled and said, "Ellie, you look like a leader already." Her words warmed my heart. On the morning of the presentation, I woke early. I prayed for strength. I wore my navy blue dress and a simple necklace. I polished my shoes until they shone. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "You are ready." At the office, the big room was full of people. Important managers sat in the front. Clients filled the chairs. My boss gave a short introduction and then said, "Now Ellie will speak." I stood up. My hands were cold, but I held my papers tight. I walked to the front and faced the crowd. "Good morning," I began. My voice shook at first, but I took a deep breath. "Today, I will present our project." Slowly I explained each part. I used simple words. I smiled when I could. I looked at the faces in front of me. Some nodded. Some took notes. I felt my fear melting away. Halfway through, Ain asked a question. His voice was loud. "Ellie, are you sure these numbers are correct?" My heart jumped, but I stayed calm. I looked at him and said, "Yes, let me explain." I pointed to the chart on the screen and showed the data. The managers nodded. One client said, "Very clear, thank you." Ain looked down. Inside, I felt victory. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then people clapped. My boss smiled proudly. A manager said, "Good work. Very professional." I walked back to my seat, my eyes wet with happy tears. After the meeting, my boss called me into his office. He said, "Ellie, I am impressed. You have grown so much. I want to offer you a new position, assistant manager." I gasped. My hands covered my mouth. "Sir, really?" I whispered. He smiled. "Yes, you earned it." I left his office, shaking with joy. Rihanna hugged me. "Ellie, I knew you could do it." Others congratulated me. For the first time in my life, I felt like a star. Not because of clothes alone, but because of the person I had become. That evening I went home and told my mother. She cried and said, "Ellie, you are not the shy girl anymore. You are a woman who shines." I hugged her tightly. The days after were different. People respected me more. They listened when I spoke. They asked for my opinion. But inside, I never forgot the old Ellie, the one who sat at the back, invisible and silent. She was still part of me. She reminded me to stay humble. One night, I opened my old notebook. I turned to the first pages. Someone said, "Pink looks good on me." I joined a group at lunch. My boss said, "Good idea." I smiled through my tears. I whispered, "Ellie, you came so far." I realized something important. It was not only the clothes. It was the confidence they gave me. Good dressing was the key, but the real door was inside me. I had learned to respect myself. I had learned to stand tall. And when I respected myself, the world respected me too. Months later, I led more projects. I trained new workers. I became someone people admired. Some asked me, "Ellie, what is your secret?" I smiled and said, "Take care of yourself. Dress with care. Speak with kindness. And never stop believing in your worth." At last I knew the truth. I was not invisible. I never was. I just needed to see myself first. And when I finally did, the world saw me too.